get into it because it cuts off the beginning. But all right, and welcome everyone. My name is Amos Joseph. I'm joined today by actually a guest co-host, and this is the 10K Rum Podcast. Now, today I'm joined by a friend of ours, friend of the show, from the Asian Capitalist. You've probably seen our show back when we were called the Shitload Preachers, where Brooke and myself had Bill and Jeff from that channel. But today we're joined with Jeff from Taiwan. How's it going, Jeff?
Good. And speaking of name changes, there might be one in the cards for us in the near future because of some of the recent developments on our channel.
Yes, which is what we're going to kind of talk about. Now, if you guys saw our last episode, you remember we went over pretty much talking about a lot of just your guys' channel, what you guys are about. You guys have been pretty much I'd say like an outside of the box kind of libertarian-ish channel, but that's been kind of different lately. And especially just because you guys haven't been putting out as regular content as you used to, right?
Yes.
Now, you yourself, what made you a libertarian first, and then what has changed from there?
Okay. I think Bill and I have actually talked about this on our channel before, which is that there's a certain personality type that gravitates towards these kinds of ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that personality type, I think, is somebody who likes to talk back at their teachers in grade school, doesn't like to be told what to do, and is also very interested in thinking outside the box.
Right.
When that personality type comes across someone like Ron Paul or ideas from Rothbard, etc., they tend to say, "Oh, these ideas are great. I would really like to live in this world that these people are proposing."
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, I would say that's still true, even though I don't really consider myself a libertarian anymore. I would still say that the picture that libertarians paint is still very attractive.
Right. For example, and this is, obviously kind of become a meme at some point too. Do you believe taxation is a form of, maybe not taxation as theft, but would you see taxation as some form of extortion or even unethical to a point?
I would say that yes, it still is, but at the same time, I also understand why it exists.
You understand its necessity.
Yeah, we could get into that in a bit, but yeah, that's so to answer the question in short, yes, it is a form of extortion, but also it exists for a reason. Not necessarily because of necessity, but also because of power dynamics.
Ooh, power dynamics, At least you're not going to say something like hierarchies or something.
I'm going to get into that later too, I think.
Ooh, even more. Now, before this change, were you because under the umbrella term libertarian, there's a lot of different kinds, minarchists, ANCAPs, maybe more of I know there's some other terms in between, where did you kind of see yourself as a what kind of libertarian were you, Jeff?
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't go from minarchist to ANCAP. I actually started at ANCAP and worked my way backwards, if you want to call it backwards. So initially, before that, actually, I should say that I was kind of a left. Is there an echo? Are you hearing that?
No, there should be.
Yeah, I was actually a leftist. I was kind of into this thing called the Venus Project, which was the centrally planned AI utopia where resources would be distributed by some AI overlord. So I was always interested in how society could organize itself in an optimal manner, right? And then I guess I kind of lost faith in centrally planned economies, and so that's what brought me straight to the opposite end. So I guess I'm a kind of person who goes from extreme to extreme, because now I've kind of gone from libertarian to neo-reactionary, but we'll get to that.
I mean, I guess it is typical of as Asians, isn't it? To go from extreme to extreme.
Why is that?
Uh well, um so you've heard me talk about kind of the dynamics of the Chinese night market. Like
Okay.
within a highly socialized society with a lot of, even in Taiwan where you are right now, I mean, it's, granted it's more free than what's over in the mainland,
Yeah.
but there is a big difference between kind of, I don't know how would you say it. So like, the free market we have here is within a very, very free society. Whereas in
Mm.
Taiwan, it's a free market within a society that not isn't quite as open and free as it is here.
Right. Okay.
So it's like on the outside you have you have universal health care, um, just a lot of social programs, I would say.
Mm.
But it's so the same thing kind of like in Hong Kong. Like there's a very collectivist culture, I'd say, within among the Chinese.
Mm.
But then within that they can breed like this weird breed of like capitalism that Americans aren't
Yeah.
even familiar with. It's
I
so
mean,
free.
even in communist China, Jack Ma, the richest man in China, is a member of the Communist Party.
Yeah, there's this, but it's a bit of an extreme. It's like you
Yeah.
have Hong Kong has now been, is now basically on the verge of wanting to go just full Americana with their
Mm. Yeah.
ideas. They're waving the American flag, demanding Second Amendment rights. That's a pretty big shift from where it's been before.
Yeah.
It's not like some countries where it's like, oh, we'd like some elections and we want some freer markets. It's just
Mm.
full blown. We want to be like that country.
Yeah. Yeah. And from what I've read, Hong Kong before the handover was very much apolitical. People were generally didn't really care much about politics.
Mhm.
And now here we are, 20 something years after the handover, and people are very much into politics.
The current year.
Yeah, the current year. Yeah.
Um,
Okay, so where was I? I was talking about
we were talking
yeah,
about how you basically kind of shifted the Venus Project. You were
to
switching. You said you shifted from actually an ANCAP more to minarchist. Actually, I tend to agree with that too. Like I've kind of drawn back. Like I'll tell people like, hey, I really, I said for all practical purposes, if I had to settle, so to speak, I'd want like some sort of minarchy.
yeah.
I think the term minarchy I actually got from I was on a Discord chat with Bunty King on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, I was talking to him with a group of people, and it got into he mentioned like he sees the future as like you were saying actually like some sort of AI that would basically control the distribution of resources in a smart way, and then it would just take care of everything we need. It's a little bit like did you ever get into Star Trek at all?
No.
There's some libertarians I've talked to where they they like this. I mean, they're full blown like ANCAPs or minarchists, enjoying like they want complete free markets, they want those freedom, but at the same time, they really like what Star Trek looks like. And a lot of people tend to attribute kind of this utopian socialist communist type of society that Star Trek has.
Yeah. Well, it's a post-scarcity society. So
Right, and that's the thing is we don't really know what's going to happen if we reach that point. When we reach that point, can we still maintain a sense of capitalism and freedom in this? Yes, people jokingly call it like this space communism or something. It's like, well, after scarce, you like I said, post scarcity, you don't really know what's going to happen. I mean, can we reach post scarcity? Is that even doable? Even if we solve that problem, can we fully eliminate the need for want and our competitive nature to want to innovate, achieve wealth and all this stuff? But that's a whole nother thing. So you went from being an ANCAP to a minarchist. Now, what's been going on?
I'll say that one thing that always troubled me about anarcho-capitalism is that, I understand the theory, the polycentric law, you have multiple, what do you call it, defensive, the cops and multiple police agencies that,
decentralized,
private law, that kind of thing. I understand, that theoretically, okay, maybe that could work. But then that has always bothered me, is that when you look at the two models, territorial monopoly on force versus private law with multiple agencies all operating in the same area, I always saw that territorial monopoly on force was a more efficient system. So that where
you wouldn't have to change the rules crossing every community you come across.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that problem. The arguments were always so they would look at the very extremes of laws that we probably wouldn't account for in terms of how to treat the marginalized, or there was the really crazy thing where what also became an unfortunate meme of ANCAPs was definition of age of consent laws.
Oh yeah.
Where people would really, really get lost in the weeds on that, and ANCAP just became, if they can consent, they can consent kind of thing. And I was like, what if you had a community that didn't believe in age of consent and another community that, one that did, one that didn't, right next to each other? How is that fair to, as we've socially accepted as basically, it's a certain age, or just kids we shouldn't just argue that. We should just set it at 18 or some. Basically, we have social conventions in place that say 18 or 16 or whatever. It's not this huge shift where you could have the problem of a community full of pedophiles and a community full of more virtuous people right next to each other. And that just gets ugly when you're talking about that, because it becomes, because you're why are you even talking about this? Is this just for the sake of the argument, or is this for the sake of practicality? Which makes more sense with, like you said, the territorial monopolization of force is more efficient, because would you say because it doesn't get lost in the weeds on little things like that? Yeah. We'll actually, for safety's sake, we'll set higher thresholds for certain type of rules that are so sensitive.
Yeah. And also, I mean, there's this other philosophy that's getting popularized nowadays called propertarianism. I don't know if you've heard about that. But propertarianism is it's got kind of its roots in libertarianism as well. But propertarianism kind of wants to, one of the propertarian fundamental beliefs is that instead of resolving everything through violence, it's better to resolve things via the court system than via violence. So let's make everything, so under propertarianism, a lot of things can be brought to court. So you got
that's a type of it's a type of minarchism I've heard a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, like even the social fabric is considered property, where if somebody damages the social fabric, they can that person can be brought to court. And
right.
Yeah, I just see that there's this huge all of these libertarian ideas and propertarian ideas, they're always proposing that I mean, the court system already is kind of jammed up and convoluted enough as it is right now. The average person and especially if they can't afford to hire a good lawyer. The average person is at a huge disadvantage in the court system compared to the CEO of Goldman Sachs, for example.
Right.
And so I see that things can get pretty messy if you want to go down this route of having, instead of just one court system, you want to have multiple court systems, multiple contract enforcement agencies, multiple things that people can sue each other over. It just gets increasingly convoluted. I'm not saying that it can't work. I'm not saying that, but, if you're asking me to choose which system I want to live under,
you have a similar problem, I think, too, back in the early American days. All 13 the 13 colonies each had their own money. Some cases, some states had more than one type of currency, and you couldn't quite convert it all that easily. So if you granted, people didn't travel as much, and I think in the world we are in today, where we can literally go anywhere in the world, some uniform type of like systems that apply across world markets, world courts, instead of having more decentralization. Granted, unless you have some sort of like independent system, like the blockchain, that can operate outside of all that. I know. So you've heard. And this is just to briefly go off on this little trail here. You've heard a lot about like these DNA packs that people get that basically, check their ancestry. They can analyze, what percentage you are of this region and all that stuff. The fear with that a lot of the time was people, these companies basically selling your genetic information to companies. I found something, I forgot the actual name, I have to look it up again. Something just popped up on my feed, and it was a company that actually does that, but they have decentralized the way they store your information. So they basically store it on the blockchain that the company themselves can't even access. So you have...
Is it encrypted? So no.
It's encrypted that only you can access it.
Okay.
So as time goes on, they release new findings, new research into genetic information, genetics, to basically release that to you, to allow you to then incorporate that into your genetic profile to see, let's say if you have something you need to know about, maybe have a proclivity for some genetic disorder, you can get that information and use it on your own. You don't have to fear it's on some centralized system where your information could just get plucked up by a company.
See, that is a case where decentralization actually makes things easier for the end user rather than harder.
Right.
So that's a case where I would agree that decentralization is a good thing.
Right, because that's become it's solving this problem that I think is inherent to centralizing a lot of things, which is now we're eroding privacy. We're starting to have these large corporations like YouTube, Google, and this that are censoring and adjusting like what information we get. Similar to kind of like that whole case that's come out now, where there's that guy that testified to the Senate talking about how Google has swayed millions of votes to Hillary. You heard about that?
Yeah, and then Google swatted him, right?
I didn't hear much after that. All I know is he basically, like, on the record has stated that from his findings on the low end, Google has the ability to sway upwards of 2 million votes to Hillary Clinton, whereas on the high end could have been upwards of 15 million votes swaying on her to her. So yeah, you have these problems with large centralized systems. How would you decentralize? Use the blockchain. How would you use these things to decentralize government? Maybe Bitcoin becomes this currency, so you don't have the money problem. Maybe you have some sort of decentralized court system. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, a lot of this stuff will have to be worked out by the genius level engineers of the future, I guess.
Some sort of but to get back onto what we were talking about, so where did once you became more of a, what made you kind of swing back to a little bit more of a minarchist from ANCAP?
Yeah. So it was the polycentric law question.
Right.
Yeah. It was also questions about national defense. National defense was something that maybe when I first became an ANCAP wasn't something that I really thought about a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last number of years, especially as I've kind of become more connected to Hong Kong, national defense has kind of jumped, in towards the top of my priorities as I watch China, slowly creep in, and basically they're running over everybody in the southern in Southeast Asia right now. They're building their own islands in the middle of the ocean. They're doing a lot of the same tactics that the CIA used to do, where they would lend money out to poorer countries, and then when the poorer countries can't pay them back, they would say, "Okay, don't worry, we just let us run your port for the next 10 or 20 years." Economic colonialism, I guess, is what you would call it.
Almost economic blackmail, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then China is starting to get more serious about Taiwan being referred to as its own country. They're pressuring airlines, they're pressuring all sorts of corporations and institutions to not refer to Taiwan as its own country, but rather as Taiwan, China.
Yeah,
so after kind of thinking about all this, I definitely see the need for there to be strong military forces to counter other strong military forces, which is another question that I think ANCAPs don't think about enough.
Right. Now, with that said, what has been the change lately in the last few months? I know you, the way you referred it to me was, if I could quote this, kind of, you were saying you have this level 50 build of this like libertarian idea, and
Sure.
you're pretty invested into it, and you've kind of, I wouldn't say I'm not going to make the call and say maybe you scrapped it, but you kind of set it aside and it's kind of looked into different. And as you were talking about all these different things, it was just more from an observation that I agree with a lot of, once you start bringing this up to a lot of libertarians, minarchists, and so on, people kind of go, it's an uncomfortable reality that I kind of call it. So some friends I have that are atheists and stuff, they call it when they talk about like full on like new atheists. So when atheists first come into learning about atheism, they basically experience what they called like atheist 1.0. So it's just kind of this very blank slate of just, God's not real, LOL, you're so stupid if you believe in God, and just very straightforward, no real conviction. It's just, I discovered, these things, therefore, screw you for believing in whatever. It's very autistic in a way. But as time goes on, they listen to, they listen to Harris, they listen to Hitchens, they kind of really have a better grasp of like, okay, kind of making a belief their own. Like every ideology kind of has its 1.0. It's just
okay. Yeah.
Anarchist 1.0 or Libertarian 1.0 is just, screeching about taxation being theft in a very just, kind of just about all of that all day, saying, just yelling about all these rights, all these amendments that we have, without really any consideration of reality of the world, of like systems in place that people are very used to, they just kind of dismiss like, well, but like, I mean, they shit on people who are like, well, granted, the roads argument, we could, it's gone on forever, but they think because you bring up roads, it's worthy of just shitting on you and saying you're a statist.
Right.
There's
yeah.
no real
I think
acknowledgement.
Something that a lot of people don't do, even I might be guilty of this still, is that we don't seek out the best counter argument to our viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
We always find the weakest ones, and then we joke about it. It's very easy to just say, okay, stop, shut up, you filthy statist.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very difficult to dig deeper and see what the kind of core foundation of another person's beliefs are, and then address their kind of the things that concern them the most. Why do they feel this way? Why do they see government as a necessity or an inevitability? And really dig into that.
Yeah. They screaming privatize everything to every question about what about roads, what about police, without any real consideration of the consequences of the inherent problems you're going to face, like we talked about with what if one society believes in one thing and another society doesn't believe in that. You have these communities right across from each other that believe in very different things. Are you going to have warlords? Are you going to have basically very, very unstable areas because you're in an area where people just have a lot of guns?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have these rules that basically protect the people who maybe don't. I mean, I've come to understanding that 80% of the population doesn't really care about these things. So what do you do about them?
Right.
Are they supposed to go off and organize and form their own little community when most of them don't vote, don't really care, don't even really think? So that's where I kind of thought about like the whole anarchism 1.0, libertarianism 1.0. They don't think about any of that.
Yeah. And the truth is there actually is this pipeline. A lot of libertarians like to dismiss the libertarian to alt-right pipeline. Or they'll say, oh, that those people were never real libertarians anyway. That's why they left libertarianism. And the same thing exists for absolutism, for neo-reaction, which is that every prominent neo-reactionary, such as Mencius Moldbug, such as True Diltom, such as some of the other bloggers that are lesser known, but all of them are actually former anarcho-capitalists.
Okay. Now you brought up that term. What are these? What is absolutism? What is this neo-reactionary?
Okay. So I've heard it explained in many different ways. I've tried to explain it in many different ways, and I think the way that I like to explain it right now is that, so there's reaction and there's revolution. Okay, that's how I kind of see the world. There's revolutionary politics and there's reactionary politics. Reactionary politics, for most of human history, was monarchism. And the revolution, the liberal revolution, the French Revolution, and the subsequent revolutions of the last 2 centuries have all been built on the premise of we're going to get rid of kings. We're going to create a world with no kings anymore. So that's when the liberal democracy came about. And that's when communism came about. And libertarianism as well. They're all going on this idea of we can live in a world without kings where everybody has equal opportunity to rise to the top, or we have everybody's equal under the law, that kind of thing. And what reaction is the kind of the counter argument to that. The argument that we're saying is that world cannot exist. Because no matter what you call these people who are in charge, whether you call them the president or the secretary general or the chairman or whatever, at the end of the day, we live in a society. People are social animals, and in a society, hierarchy forms. And in hierarchy, there's always somebody who sits at the top. that person makes the rules, that person makes the exceptions to the rules. And you don't have to call him a king, but at the end of the day, he is the sovereign ruler. So, and that exists in every society.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of getting rid of the kings, neo-reactionaries are people who have rejected that idea because we see that as an impossibility.
Why do you think we see it as an impossibility?
Why do neo-reactionaries see it as an impossibility?
No, why is it it would be the revolutionaries that would be seeing this as an impossibility, right?
The revolutionaries believe in a world without kings. They believe that their system can create a world without kings. You know, democracy or democratic socialism. You know, they believe that this world is a more fair world where there are no sovereign rulers, where everybody is held accountable by the rule of law or the Constitution, or the
Well,
communist.
you have a whole array of ideologies and types of systems that would adopt that kind of premise in different ways. You have your constitutional republic like the US, you have your full-blown just democracies, you have constitutional monarchies or parliamentary stuff like that.
Mhm.
And then you do have your democratic socialist nations. There's a whole variety of those. So not without getting into all of that, but you were saying basically this world, like the people who do believe like we're in a world where there are, there's always going to be rulers and kings. Would you say it goes as far as like there will always be tyrants?
Not necessarily. There's always going to be the potential for tyranny.
Because I think that's the big question with these revolutionaries is they want to move away from basically eliminate the possibility of tyrants rising, or at least have a system that keeps the existence of tyrants, like the rise of tyrants, in check. So with the US, we have oh, go ahead.
This is the irony, though. It's that the revolutions of the last 2 or so centuries have been disasters, have been an endless series of tyranny. Especially if you look at communism, we don't really need to.
Right. I mean, that's a very clear one.
Yeah. It's a little bit less clear with the democratic countries, I guess you could say. It's a little bit less obvious, but if you look at what kind of the escalation of the culture war in the current year, where they're pushing for these things such as sexualizing children, pushing for open borders, pushing for this kind of hyper capitalism is another thing. It's another thing that it's kind of blasphemy. As when you're a libertarian, it's blasphemy to make any critique of capitalism. But that was another thing that really got me thinking, which is that I think in the kind of current age, we look at we've forgotten that capitalism is kind of a means to an end. We look at capitalism as the end itself. So we're not open to the possibility that a complete free market might actually be detrimental to us. The possibility has to be at least considered, right?
True. What would you say? Where do you see what kind of problems do you see that are probably already occurring or could occur?
So the American working class, the hollowing out of the manufacturing base, and so it's really interesting because America, every country in the world actually relies very heavily on trade, on the global market being open. But we can see that not every country is going to be cooperative at all times, right?
Right.
Yeah. And so when a country such as the United States, let's say they were very dependent on certain resources coming out of China, maybe even dependent on them for kind of the well-being of the people, for maybe it's a very critical resource. And one day China says, okay, we're not playing ball anymore. We're going to cut off this resource. That could be very detrimental to a country. And that's something that we haven't considered because we've taken the openness of the markets for granted all this time.
Mm-hmm.
The post World War II world order, right? That's something that we've taken for granted. And
right.
It's only kind of in recent years where we've started to see that maybe it's not going to be as stable as it is for all time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think this kind of economic nationalism is kind of coming back to the forefront.
Right,
that's why
right.
people like Steve Bannon and people who think like that are starting to their message is starting to be heard because people are realizing, oh shit, like this economic order isn't going to be here for all time, and it's kind of important for nations to be self-sufficient.
So you think that then, I mean, kind of the inevitabilities of this globalized economy, so where more and more first world countries are starting to rely on more of these like third world countries, like we get a lot of our goods from China, you think that just shouldn't happen? Or
I think we shouldn't take it for granted. I think it's a very risky thing for a nation to completely rely on foreign imports for its survival. I think
true.
Yeah.
But that will, don't you think it's inevitable?
I would like to think
as it becomes easier and easier to trade with these countries with faster, more efficient means of trading. I mean,
I understand the efficiency argument. I understand that it is cheaper to get your stuff from China. But I think that a nation should always consider, what is it? Prepare for the worst, but what is it? Something for the best, prepare for the worst.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you think we briefly touched on the Star Trek thing. Do you think then eventually, maybe not post scarcity, but definitely in a direction where we would just start, so the automation thing, do you think that could solve our problems, where then we wouldn't really worry about getting most of our goods from other countries? We would just have machines do it for us?
That's a possibility.
Do you worry about then at all with like how that could actually take away more of these manufacturing bases versus globalization?
Yeah, that's also a concern as well. Yeah. So nationhood is a balancing act. There's a lot of things you have to juggle.
Right. Because then the whole question of kings and tyrants and rulers kind of is, a lot of that is, I don't know if you'd say alleviated, but it wouldn't be worried about as much once we get to this point where a lot of our goods are just produced automatically. Like we wouldn't have to worry about how to deal with our workforce being outsourced to other countries, how other countries are screwing with us because of how they trade with us. It's just we just have factories to make everything for us. There's no, that could be a type of self-sufficiency that you were talking about.
Yeah.
What do you think of that then? Is that kind of an answer to this, or is that, because a lot of these ideas that you're presenting, I sense at least, there's a little bit of a clinging to the past, whereas we're coming on this point where the future is coming really, really quickly, that a lot of these probably won't be as big of a problem anymore.
Well, I'm going to jump into a little bit of a sidetrack and then we'll circle back.
Okay.
So there is this concept that I came across recently called the Imperial Formula. the 5 Gs. So the 5 Gs are gold, guns, genes, as in genetics, glory, and God. And the person who wrote this is kind of describing the 5 ingredients for a strong and sustainable nation.
Mm-hmm.
So gold is obvious. You want your nation to be wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And you want your nation to be wealthy so you can buy more guns. You want to have a strong military. You don't want people to fuck with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most political ideologies understand these two things, right? You want to have gold, you want to have guns. But a lot of revolutionary political ideologies don't understand the other 3 components. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why we're seeing this kind of degeneration of culture in America. Because the classical liberals don't understand that you need more than just guns and gold to make a good nation. So the liberals like to talk about GDP as kind of the measurement, kind of the ultimate measurement of how well your country is doing.
Mm-hmm.
But there are certain things that cannot be measured in numbers, which also indicate how well your nation is doing. So I'll first talk about genes, demographics. I think genes is kind of a way of describing demographics. So not just genetics, but also IQ, the IQ of your nation, the fertility rates, the population pyramid, age demographics, immigration. There's a lot of things to consider there. That's kind of the constitutional republic liberals of our time are not considering, because they're more focused on GDP. So they're willing to, for the sake of winning elections and for the sake of global markets, they're willing to kind of throw demographics to the wayside.
Right, right.
Yeah. And the other 2 things being God and glory. I would say that they're kind of, I would say that what they just culture and what was the other one? Culture and shoot, I forgot my talking points.
Religion.
Anyway, maybe we'll get back to. We'll talk about culture first. It's another thing that a lot of the liberal democracies are. It's another thing that can't be measured too. It can't be quantified, which is what makes it difficult, right?
Right, right.
So that's why I think that it's not just about the reactionaries are not just trying to cling to the past, but they're also trying to address a lot of the problems that the modern day liberal democracy does not address.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Huh.
So
what's that?
I have it written down actually, so I just have to look at my notes.
Yeah, I think it's tricky because I was just I could just you could call it a what would be the would be the proper way to call this, the controversy radar, if you want to call it. Once you started talking about genes and demographics, I was like, I have no problem talking about it. I just know once you get into that, people kind of like, okay, what is he? Again, these liberal kind of Democrats kind of stay away from that. They're very cautious of that. We'll just say, because they think that you're immediately going to start going into like start making an argument for ethno states or whatever.
Right. Well, this is an interesting topic to get into. By the way, the God and glory was ideology and community. That's what I was trying to get at.
Right. Kind of a
when you have a nation that's demographically strong, with a strong sense of community and unity, and unity, and it's also wealthy and has a lot of guns, that's when you have a strong nation.
Right. I think yeah. Okay. I'll go this far even to say because we've talked about this in the past, Brooke and myself on the show. We've talked about how people don't acknowledge like so you have Bernie Sanders, some of these people that are pointing at the Nordic countries as these perfect models of, universal health care and a type of socialism, just highly socialized societies.
Yeah.
Without considering the fact that there's some of the most demographically homogenous countries in the world.
Yeah.
At least in the West. And we just say that, and that in a way to dispel their argument that it's going to work so great here, without really considering the fact that like much beyond that. The fact that, again, back to the whole thing, 80% of people are 80% of populations tend to just, I'd say, you want to attribute some of the more primal or basic or even more tribalistic behaviors. Maybe, it's not to say like 80% of the population is just racist, but 80% of your population of a certain group is going to behave a certain way based upon demographics.
Mm.
So, let's say there's a 50-50 country. Let's say you have a country that is 50% white and 50% Hispanic, we'll say, or even Latin American, we'll say.
Yeah.
80% of those respective 50% of those two halves are going to be affected by the demographics.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's crime, clashes, you're going to have areas of cities that'll be segregated. It will just happen,
mm-hmm.
which will raise tensions, and you'll have even clashes in the political sphere. Now half of your House of Representatives are trying to satisfy their people group's interests. Mm-hmm. The other half of House of Representatives is going to satisfy their people's interests. And it's always going to be turned into, the race card is going to be played by both.
Yeah.
And no clear objective like goals and achievements are really going to be shared. There's no like, let's just get stuff done.
Yeah. It's such an easy card to play. That's the thing. It's that, I think during times of prosperity, nobody really wants to rock the boat. So then they say, okay, let's not play the race card. But once it's played, then the other side has to play it too. It's kind of like the ultimate weakness of any society. It's that once somebody plays the race card, and there is this discontent that's built up over the years, it's kind of like a, what do you call it? It becomes the meta, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This tension no one really addresses. Libertarians, Republicans, Democrats, a lot of just across the political landscape, at least in America, you talk about this. No one really acknowledges this, that demographics matter when you understand that most people are affected by that. We can sit here all day and be all enlightened, like, you and I can coexist, and
mm-hmm.
we could make money together. We could, have markets, and all that's great. Like you're saying, the whole, GDP and, freedom and guns and gold, you have all this. It's all great if you have these higher ideals. If you're part of the 20% that gets it, that thinks about these things, you can rise above that.
Mm-hmm.
The other 80% doesn't think that way, And again, it's not to say 80% of a group is just racist, but 80% of a group is affected by more, if you want to call it, trivial matters like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That we have more history being that way than not being that way as humans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another point that was brought up recently on this channel called The Distributist, he was doing a critique of democracy. And he was saying that one of the kind of biggest weaknesses of democracy is this racial factionalism. It's that in democratic societies, victimhood is one of the best currencies, because politicians can't possibly pay attention to every single issue from every single individual.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why individuals have to form cliques, have to form factions. And one of the easiest ways to form a faction is based on race. I mean, or people who live in a community together at the very least. And so that's why that's why politicians happen to pander to racial groups, especially the racial groups who have the most grievances. Because that's the game. That's how democracy is played. You have these representatives who can't pay attention to everything, so they pay attention to the groups with the most grievances who complain the loudest. And therefore, groups get together and they complain loud.
I'm just thinking of like a really catchy line, if I ever talked about this in depth. Why race unfortunately matters. Because it's saying that it's not, you don't want it to, but it does. In this world where we're all trying to be enlightened and we don't see color, it still matters.
There's also the other issue of kind of values, core values, or core temperament, that kind of thing, where people from specific certain ethnic groups have different core values and different social tendencies or temperament than people from the other side of the world, right? We've evolved separately for who knows how many centuries. There's bound to be differences.
Right. Yeah, and I'm a perfect example of that gone wrong. No, being half and half. Excuse me. And people don't really like they'll acknowledge that, white people this, black people that, Mexican people this, Asian people this other thing, all these different things without really understanding how that can affect an entire society. But I don't want to get too, we've already gone a little far into this.
One example I can think of is that back in high school, my high school was kind of 50% white, 50% Asian, but even in the Asian, there was maybe 20% Vietnamese, 30% Chinese, kind of something like that. And the Chinese students would always say how rowdy the Nammers were, the Vietnamese were. And
that's what's interesting. So when I was in school, when I started going to American school here, I went to middle school. I was in 7th grade. And I started noticing like the Laotian, Cambodian. Laotian and Cambodian were like the two, or Hmong, that were. I think Minnesota has the second highest Hmong population, in among the 50 states. So I see them, they see me. I'm this, half breed, and the kids in my class, the white kids would be very confused as to why I would not get along with these kids, like at all. And I said, well, because they're not Chinese. Or just actually, I'll just be real honest. I was at one point a bit intimidated by these kids because they tend to collectivize in a way that I didn't necessarily see as attractive, so to speak. So in my neighborhood, I'd see school buses coming and going from one from the elementary school, one from the high school, and one from the middle school. Well, I see the elementary school bus come by, and there was a street we were near. It was like a city, so 1 block away from us, there was this cul-de-sac, like this 1/4 mile long stretch of road that ended in a cul-de-sac. All Southeast Asian families. And so the bus, there's a bus stop right there. They drop off, and there's like 10 little darker skinned Asian kids walking by. and they look like a gang.
Yeah.
Kind of, and here I was, like, if I ever came across them, I'd be like, man, I'd probably go to the other side of the street.
Yeah.
And and then if I told that to like another white person, what? But they're Asian.
Yeah.
No, it's different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that. Like you have, I bet even the white side of your school probably was a bit confused by that, because they would all be white and you guys would be a whole bunch of different kinds of Asians, and they wouldn't understand how to like talk to you guys, right? At least how to think about that, right?
Yeah.
Like it used to be, you had a difference between, if you watched Gangs of New York.
Yeah.
You had the Irish, you had, what was it, like the Irish Catholics,
The
Protestants.
early Irish settlers versus the newcomers.
Yeah, you had this split. I mean, white people calling white people the N-word. Makes no sense, but that's how it was. You had you had even white people calling Asian people the N-word too. It wasn't just strictly a word they called black people. It was, they would call each other that. They would call basically what they considered to be like racial outsiders.
I think at the end of the day, it's that there's so many different lines that people can form in groups and fracture along. So the more that you have, the more vulnerable your society becomes.
And you think democracy, these democratic systems, can become like the perfect environment for those to basically, those lines, those differences to be exacerbated and become more problematic.
Yeah. And that's not even my harshest critique of democracy, actually, but that's one critique of democracy.
What is your harshest critique of democracy?
That it's BS. That we elect a president every 4 to 8 years. We elect, and even a lot of people on the right, and even ANCAPs have the same criticism, right? It's that we elect these people, but who's really in power?
Oh, deep state?
Yes. Deep state, NGOs, you have the World Economic Forum, you have the Bilderberg Group, you have the bankers. And once again, it does circle back to the controversial but
more controversy with Jeff.
But it's funny. I was talking to my cousin in Singapore about this too. I was saying we were talking about democracy again, and I was saying, who really runs the world? And she's very apolitical, and she was like, "You mean Jews?"
Oh boy.
So it's kind of an unspoken thing, and it's very not polite to say, but a lot of people have this in the back of their mind.
It's kind of a meme in some ways. I see it as a meme. I'll say I personally don't look too much into it. I mean, I've heard
it's not all Jews. It's not, the entire Jewish community in one giant conspiracy. But I mean, if you look at who is at the top of a lot of institutions right now, yes, it's a lot of Jewish people.
Right. I mean, yeah. I actually, a little side thing. I was talking to someone about how it's funny that Americans try to, which they try to censor a lot of foreign media to suit their sort of politically correct ideology. For example, if you ever watched Dragon Ball Z, did you ever watch Dragon Ball Z?
Yeah.
Remember Mr. Popo?
Mm-hmm. The black guy?
Yeah, the complete black caricature they had on there.
Yeah.
And how in some releases in America, they color corrected him to be purple.
Oh, I have never seen that.
You can find it. It's or there. So there was a Dragon Ball Z movie where they were fighting like these other androids, and there was an android who was this short black guy, but again, the caricature of the lips, the color, and he was drinking. So in the American release, they again color coded his skin to be purple. And then in like parodies and stuff, people have always joked like, well, it's just about, your problem. He goes, what? Because I'm purple? Like they would like the people who did the parodies and did the voiceovers would joke about like how it's just so funny, like this is how we're so PC that they kind of work around that. Like, and then people were, so I brought this up to someone. I said, yeah, and it's funny how J.K. Rowling plays, tries to be this like really PC, really politically correct person, yet the bankers in her universe of Harry Potter,
right, yeah,
are these short, big nosed individuals who, yeah, it's like, it was just a funny thing to think about. Like, oh man, like she literally made her like characters in there, the bankers, as this caricature of like really bad caricature of Jews. Like,
yeah.
Yeah. So without going too much into that, what are the solutions that sort of this reactionary idea presents as like, how should we run systems?
Okay, so the reactionary viewpoint is that hierarchy is inevitable, sovereign rulers are inevitable, right? There's always going to be someone sitting at the top of the hierarchy. So therefore, instead of having this kind of faux democracy, and instead of having this kind of faux equality, because right now in this, I've noted that under democracy there are all these problems that pop up, and also the fact that we have unelected power, right? We have power that's not held accountable because we can't hold whoever's in charge accountable. We don't even know who's in charge, right? Who's in charge of the Bilderberg Group, and yet the Bilderberg Group is in charge of the entire world.
Well, you have a lot of institutions also in place, like we'll just say on paper, that also don't have much oversight.
Yeah.
Brooke and I talked about this last week on the show, where there's whole offices, like officially recognized offices in the government that claim to have oversight, but that oversight is never exercised.
Yeah.
So there's whole institutions that basically get away with breaking the law or violating people's rights, and their oversight is like some small group like in the House of Representatives or something, and they don't ever like do anything.
Is it even that though?
What's that?
Is it even that? Is it even some group in the House of Representatives? Because those
yeah, I mean,
every turn,
officially yes, but in terms of if is there any like other interests being lobbyists or individuals that are controlling these institutions, it's probable. I'd say.
So the reactionary viewpoint is formalism. Our view is that we have to return to formal power, to have formal rulers who we know are responsible, but who also have the long-term outlook of the nation, in their best interest. Because you see all these presidents nowadays who, after they get out of office, they become, Barack Obama just bought some mansion, $20 million mansion on a private island somewhere. All of these current day politicians, and a lot of people, members of Congress, after they leave Congress, go on to become lobbyists. So they don't necessarily have the long-term interests of the country in their best interests. For them, it's more about using their political career to launch their $1 million career after politics.
Hey, you can be a speaker and write a book and all that.
So they're different formalists have different visions of how their formal, political system, their formal government would look like. The one that I find most interesting is actually one from Mencius Moldbug that he wrote more than 10 years ago, which is called the Joint Stock Republic. The Joint Stock Republic, Moldbug's theory goes that the Joint Stock Corporation was one of the greatest organizational inventions of mankind, but it came a little bit too late. It came after the liberal revolutions. So the opportunity for formal monarchism to combine with the Joint Stock Corporation, that window of time never really existed. But Moldbug proposes that we go back to something, we revisit that, monarchism combined with stocks, with the joint stock corporation. And there's an entire article on it. Maybe
How would that? So you would have a king.
Yes, you would have a CEO. You would have it would be a board of directors and a CEO who run the country.
Oh, that's like Why is that? Why does this almost sound like some like large ANCAP nation or state or something?
See, that's the thing. It's that ANCAPs and absolutists seem to be on totally different ends of a political spectrum, but at the same time, they're kind of their end goal is not so dissimilar.
Right, because once you're CEO and a board of directors, I'm like, so because I've discussed with people like privatized cities.
Yeah. Yes. There you go.
And really, when it comes down to is you would have like ultimately someone would be like the guy that is running most of like the city. And he's so
maybe think of it this way too. It's that the private property ethic. Okay. So libertarians might find the idea that a CEO runs this private city disagreeable. But what if the private city was the private property of the corporation? Then it wouldn't be so disagreeable, would it?
Yeah, you're given you're like, oh well, I mean, I could just go somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. The city is private
property.
So
in this world, then would you have like sort of this again, would you have the problem of like a bunch of city states popping up? Or would you have let's say if America became that, would it be ideal to have like 50 different governments, or would there just be one?
I think it comes down to kind of because I was talking about sustainability too, right? America has these food basins, Mississippi, California to some degree, and there's also a lot of areas in America that are completely reliant on those food basins. So I see the natural kind of divide, the natural borders are where the food basins combined with the economic hubs. Yeah. So California could certainly, I mean, if it could get rid of its Democrats, it could certainly be a fairly sustainable and strong nation on its own. But if you look at some more barren areas, they would probably have to combine with some more food productive states.
Wouldn't then some type of globalization inevitably still happen between these formalist, nations?
Yeah.
They would still trade with each other because there are areas where you just can't get certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of the reality for now. I mean, if you look at
right.
If you look at Singapore, I was just in Singapore, and Singapore had a peaceful, mostly peaceful separation with Malaysia. But Singapore still relies, I think, completely on Malaysia for fresh water, which is
right.
It's kind of I mean, things are pretty stable right now, so they can take it for granted for now. But I think Singapore is trying to figure out as quickly as possible a solution to become water independent, because they recognize that this peaceful coexistence is not eternal.
They'd have to really like invest in some desalinization. Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that kind of one of the main ways then, as a formalist sort of movement then, is to advocate for some sort of monarchy? Are there other forms of government that reactionaries can see that can work as well?
Well, fascism is kind of a cousin of formalism.
Mm.
It's a form of formalism. Like, it's they are an ideological cousin, I would say. And this is maybe a discussion for another time, but it is interesting to see the kind of differences between monarchism and fascism, and from the monarchist perspective, where did the fascists go wrong? Because Hitler was talking about a lot of the same issues that everybody in kind of the alternative right is talking about: culture, demographics, hedonism, materialism, all the same stuff, really. It's just that he ended up going down a path that a lot of us don't want to repeat. So it'd be interesting to take a look at how to address a lot of the concerns that are legitimate without going down the same path.
Yeah, capitalizing on the weakness of a nation and the failings of, I guess, what was the term again? Whatever republic they had.
The Weimar,
huh?
Weimar Republic.
Yeah, the Weimar Republic. Yeah. Because I've talked about some videos I've seen. There's videos I've seen that paint the broad stroke that like Hitler is democracy gone wrong, and it's like, no, Hitler is the Weimar Republic gone wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is one of many types of incarnations of this democratic process. We also acknowledge that democratic socialism is just, we're going to democratically elect tyrants who will go becoming, from them being democratically elected leaders to then authoritarian leaders that will stay in power to maintain, control of markets, of the means of production and such. So where fascism went wrong, where we just, I guess, what is the monarchist perspective of where it went wrong?
I mean, this is something that I want to think more. I think is
okay.
One critique that I would have is that I don't like it when governments rely on misinformation to stay in power.
Right.
Yeah. So governments who fear the truth, who fear free speech, basically, who fear having their narrative challenged, I think that's kind of a bad sign, a sign that you're not running a very good government.
And that's where the fascism, you think a big problem with fascism was they were basically spreading lies to maintain their control.
Yeah. I mean, book burnings, that kind of thing.
Book burnings. Well, also putting away political opponents.
Yes.
Ideological opponents, and even what they can, I guess you could say, cultural opponents too.
Yeah.
Because people always, we talk about, okay, the Jews got put to concentration camps, but there were also a lot of other people. Like there were 6 million Jews, but there were also millions of other types of people, communists, homosexuals, and probably just a whole bunch of other what they consider to be social deviants.
Yeah.
Were also put away too. It's like, that's not, no, you're not doing, like, that's not a way to run things, So within this, like, this formalist, this monarchy, how would freedom be addressed? Would the people still have the ability to criticize their government?
It would depend on who's in power. I mean, ultimately, it always does, doesn't it?
I mean, that's the problem with that's the problem with tyranny again, is is it more likely to have tyranny under this, CEO government versus what we have now?
That is the ultimate question.
Because the ultimate check on government that we have under this constitutional republic is the Second Amendment. If all else fails, Second Amendment. We would just have to, there'd be a period of unrest, followed by either we force government to hold a new election to elect new people, or we force laws to basically acknowledge individual freedoms.
That's assuming that you win the boogaloo, though.
True. But I mean, guerrilla warfare and enough guns can go quite a ways.
Yeah.
I mean, we're more armed than I think. Yeah, we were more armed than the colonists were armed.
Mm-hmm. So, formalists are trying to come up with ways to align the interests of the rulers with the ruled, right?
Right.
So, any proposal that's being put forth by formalists is trying to address the question of tyranny with incentives rather than some form of check and balance.
Right.
Yeah. So in what scenario would it be in the best interest for a leader to allow freedom of speech versus not allow freedom of speech? That kind of thing. These are the questions that are being thought about.
So this is going to sound really blasphemous, I think, to a lot of our libertarian audience. In the reverse, so on one hand, the people fear the tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
In the reverse, the government, the leaders, should also consider the fear of civil unrest, revolution, rebellion that could arise.
Yeah.
So the incentive for freedom of speech is less of a possibility of the underground.
Yeah.
You can keep, they're happy because they get to talk about they're happy because they get to talk shit about you.
Yeah. And I think it would be actually very productive for governments across the world right now is instead of trying to censor dissent, instead of trying to push these people, silence these people and drive them underground, it would be way more productive, I think, if they would just address a lot of these concerns. They could have a kind of a secretary of public relations or something, just like most corporations do, right?
Yeah, but I mean, you could have
hotline, that kind of thing.
I mean, but there's plenty of you have plenty of companies out there. Just to use the example of CEOs and companies that get all sorts of complaints, and then none of it gets addressed.
Mm.
But
I think it'd be in their best interest if they could properly address a lot of the concerns that people have.
True.
Rather than trying to silence them and telling Google to ban these people.
Yeah, I mean, so imagine if in this formalist world we have Google as one of the countries.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't have checks and balances to sue them to kind of like what's going on now.
Mm.
How would you check for that then? Where's the check and balance for that? Where's the backup plan to dealing with that if they just decide?
I mean, it's not the perfect solution, but it is a solution, which is that if you don't like it, you can leave. It's not perfect. I'm not saying that that's.
Would you be allowed to leave though?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah,
because we know about that in a certain country you're nearby. You're not allowed to move in some cases if you're not behaving, you're not appeasing. You're not. Either you do something that's considered socially unacceptable, but not even if it's just illegal, it's just socially unacceptable behavior.
Yeah, but actually, a lot of people would argue that China, they might not be seeing the consequences right now, but give it another 10 years and they're really going to feel it, because I think something like $3 trillion have left China in the last decade in capital flight.
Wow.
And yeah. And everybody who is capable of leaving is, they've already got their citizenship in a mostly Western country, mostly Western countries, but people, the brain drain and the capital flight in the last number of years, it's going to add up. And China might not be feeling the effects right now, but so, in a hypothetical Google nation, the same thing could happen.
People would just sneak out, literally.
Yeah. And it'd be quite difficult for them to recruit, new people to come in, knowing how bad they are.
Yeah, because this is the difference with, I guess, these democratic systems versus this more formalist or monarchies is outlook. So when you're looking at the outlook of, let's just say the Trump presidency, what are they looking at today? Tomorrow, the next week, the next few months, the next few years.
Yeah.
Are they looking at the next few decades? No.
Yeah.
Looking at the next.
Yeah, America looks great right now, but what happens after the 2020 election? I mean, things are up in the air.
Well, the new slogan now is "Keep America Great," and I'm like, how long can you do that though? Even if you were able to pull something off, how long can you really do that? So this monarchy,
you're one election away from being a socialist country.
Literally.
Yeah.
I mean, Ben Shapiro wants to talk about the gridlock and whatever, but given it could go really quickly. And so when you do have this CEO with a board of directors in power, they're looking at long-term projections. They're looking at what really matters, I'd say, in some ways. Like, I had a conversation with someone trying to argue why, like he admires how China is playing, like how China is able to play the long game versus the rest of the world. They're looking at, projections over decades, possibly centuries, depending upon, how deep you look. Whereas we're looking at the markets today. You see, the Dow did this today and the Dow is doing that tomorrow. And it's like, we're not looking at what are the long-term projections of the US. Like, well, one of the big questions is, how long can a constitutional republic like this last? No one really talks about that. What are the long-term problems when it comes to, just really anything?
Yeah. I had a conversation with a friend who said that, the Chinese dynasties of the past, they usually would have 3 to 4 good emperors, and then things would go to shit. And then I said, well, right now we'd be lucky to have 3 to 4 good years of leadership, let alone 3 to 4 good emperors.
Oh, in the US?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, most Western countries, that's kind of the case.
Yeah.
Germany is having what I'd say probably their second worst chancellor. And that could change, The UK went from Theresa May to now Boris Johnson. Now, however you want to look at that is however you can interpret that, but that's a big change.
Yeah.
You have memes now, Boris Johnson and Trump, like, kind of buddy getting along now, versus you had Theresa May and Trump that were like pretty opposed to each other.
So how can any kind of long-term vision be implemented in the world right now, under these democratic systems?
So your long-term vision, it basically retreats to the shadows. Whether people believe in a deep state or not, there are people in this country that look at the long game, but they're not going to be the people that are in the spotlight.
Exactly.
The spotlight is
that's where the long-term vision is coming from. It's these globalists, I mean,
right.
I'm a meme now, but it's true. These people are people who have this agenda. They run things from the shadows. They are the permanent government that is not elected.
Right. So now that we've talked about all that, I guess what is there any other thing you wanted to get into? Like, so what did we kind of touch on, like what has caused you to have these changes, or we kind
Right.
of address that?
Well, there was one thing, which is that, yeah, ironically enough, Google did radicalize me. I was radicalized by Google.
Oh shit.
Actually, another thing that really got me thinking about all of this was during the Vox apocalypse. I was kind of, at the time, I was still trying to find the libertarian solution to the Vox apocalypse. And, libertarians would be like, oh, don't worry, let the free market sort it out. And, I sort of took a step back at that point. It's like, where has the free market gotten us? It's driving us towards this kind of cyberpunk future that all the dystopian, Blade Runner type movies talk about, where eventually we are run by corporate overlords who are unaccountable and also don't have any of our interests, aligned with theirs. All they care about is profits. All they care about is, using people as commodities, basically.
Well, yeah. Facebook makes money off of the information we provide them.
Yeah. So that's when I really started to revisit these ideas, these formalist ideas that I had heard months prior, and to really consider them. And that's kind of where it all started for me.
Are you still working out a lot of these different ideas, or have you been pretty solid on kind of like adopting more of this? Like,
I'm definitely a formalist. I would say I'm definitely a formalist right now. It's the one thing that I'm still trying to work on is how to describe these ideas to people, how to express these ideas without them immediately kind of shutting down.
Libertarian formalism, if that's even a thing. I mean, there are a couple of people that were in the chat here were throwing up terms. What is it? Polish Corwinist or Hoppian paleo-libertarianism, monarcho-capitalism.
Yeah, actually, Hoppianism is another kind of step along the path. A lot of people go from anarcho-capitalism to Hoppian to formalism.
Yeah, because I've talked to, so we had a guy on that was I guess he'd be considered like a black flag anarchist. Like he's not he's not really along what's the term? Any of the other flags, basically, the black, red, black, yellow, or even black, gray, agorism and stuff like that. Because he just sees like a world where you have these basically like a world of communities of different ideas. You would have an ANCOM community somewhere, probably failing. You would have an ANCAP society somewhere else. That's probably one way too, or you could have but you would be in a world of basically communities experimenting with different types of government. And the ones that are most popular would have the most people.
Yeah. They would also need a way to protect themselves from hostile neighbors, though.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, what's going to happen to the anti-gun anarchists?
Yeah.
Which is, again, we kind of talked about that in the beginning with the inherent problems of some of these like ANCAP or minarchist ideas is different laws, different rules, different systems that people would have to constantly adapt to as they move through the world. But so you consider yourself this formalist. Is there a large following of this specific ideology?
Think at the moment, no. But at the same time, I think that there is this general sentiment that's bubbling up on the right, which is that more and more people are starting to stray from the strategy, maybe the 2015 strategy, which is mimetic warfare. In 2015, a lot of us thought that we were just going to meme our way to victory. We were going to meme the left out of existence. As long as we win back the culture, then everything is going to be fine. But I think more and more people are coming to realization, I guess you could say, that it's going to take more than just memes. It's going to take power. We're going to have to take back a lot of things from the left. The left hasn't just only dominated culture, it's also dominated institutions. It's dominated institutional power.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, the alt-right, the alternative right, including formalism, might not be the most popular ideology, but a lot of people on the right are starting to look for answers beyond Kekistan. Yeah. And I think it's a matter of time because the traffic is one way. Nobody's going from alternative right back to classical liberalism and libertarianism. The traffic is all flowing one way.
It's one pipeline. There's no alt-right to libertarian pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, does formalism really fit with the alternative right though?
I mean, if you go by the political triangle model, I think there's certainly a lot of similarities. I mean, maybe the similarity is addressing the things that cannot be measured: glory, God, and genetics.
Yeah, those get a little bit vague, especially like because I've heard there's a whole spectrum along the alt-right. There's individuals that want full-blown 100% ethno-state, purge all of the foreigners.
Yeah.
And then there's some that are like, well, they just want like the supermajority of the like pre-Immigration Act US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
90 some odd percent white kind of country.
Mm-hmm.
They're not pushing for or if you within, I guess what relates to me the most, and I get a bit of a kick out of at times, is the Hapa ethno-nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
the half white, half Asian nation state.
Yeah. There are other ways you can go about that too, which is that it doesn't necessarily have to be that you kick out the outsiders. It could just be that you have more shares in the nation than the outsiders do. So the Hapas each get 2 shares, whereas the purebreds only get 1 share. So you have twice the voting power of.
Oh, so it's the 1/2 compromise.
Yeah.
Instead of the 3/5 compromise. There could be 20, the population could have 25, 26% us, but we have 52% of the vote.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So I think there is actually a lot of interesting ideas that can come from this new kind of direction that the right is taking, rather than, it's kind of weird how the old new right, or the classical liberals and the libertarians, actually has become more rigid ideologically.
Yes, that's a big problem. Again, like I said, this libertarianism 1.0 is becoming more and more prevalent. Just, you have more and more you have a lot of fracturing within the movement, but for the most part, you have the Libertarian Party is becoming very placating to sort of the mainstream narratives.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen the Libertarian Party's social media. They have a lot of these very cringeworthy posts.
Yeah.
And there, of course, have been meme pages making fun of this.
Yeah. I don't know how Nick Sarwark keeps getting elected to be the head of the.
I mean, I actually know of I know someone who is running for chair, and definitely is trying to move away from that light level of autism and just stupidity. But there are people within the movement that just they don't really see big picture stuff. They're looking at just the talking points, they say free markets all day, but don't really understand why. They say, you know, open borders, freedom of movement, but don't really understand the implications.
Yeah.
They say they sit there and talk all day about trying to be the party that is not part of the party politics, yet it still is. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation that plenty of libertarians have had. But we're actually coming up on about an hour and 35 here. Anything else you want to add quick?
I will say that I don't think I did the best job of representing my viewpoint today.
It's your first time you've actually done this in a public setting, though, right?
Yeah. So I would encourage, I guess, I mean, our kind of patron saint is Mencius Moldbug. So I would encourage, if people are at least curious, to go read the blog Unqualified Reservations. He's a very good writer, actually. So it's a lot of good reading there.
Yeah, it's really interesting ideas that I find fun to talk about, which is tough, I think, because, this is the first time you're talking about all this in a public setting. And I just figured when I heard you talk about this and how it's very different from this typical libertarian idea that we've sort of come to understand, like, you know, the Asian capitalists have kind of been about, you know, and again, to kind of address this too, is, you know, I've always kind of seen, like, as the years have gone by, like just through watching some of your guys' videos, there has been an evolution and there's been like a shift between like how you and Bill like talk about different things. Like, you guys can talk about a lot of stuff, which is what made your channel so successful. While also I can see a clear difference between your guys' different outlooks and different, like, you guys are obviously different people. You would look into different things.
I would say that I was always kind of a bad libertarian too, because I always had so many doubts and questions. Like, that was kind of the whole framework of our show, which is that I would have these doubts about libertarian ideas, and then
that's what I kind of liked, is you guys didn't see libertarian as gospel. You saw it as, hey, it's a cool idea. There's a lot of things that make sense, that, you know, critiquing the world as it is, and so we're gonna just like pick it apart.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I said outside of the box libertarians.
Yeah.
And both you kind of went about it the different way, and it wasn't just, you know, sitting there all day and we'll just say like other libertarian, you know, Asian libertarian YouTubers that just talk about, here's the 3 ways something is this, and this. And
whoa, that's a personal friend of mine.
I know, I'm not. No, that's why I didn't want to like. I know. I'm not. No problem with that. It's just okay. That becomes
my friends.
Huh?
You're both my friends. It's okay.
It's fine. No personal hard feelings there. It was just just kidding. No, I wasn't trying to. But anyways, thank everyone for, of course, joining us. I think this conversation definitely merits more down the road, and I definitely excited to see like where you go with it. If that's going to really change a lot of the videos.
It probably.
Did you want? Oh yeah. And how, like, what's gonna happen there?
We didn't even get to talk about Confucianism today, which is next time.
Yes, definitely want to have you on next time. Yeah, definitely check out the Asian Capitalists. Check out they have a huge catalog of videos. Of course, now, because I know you and Bill, you guys are not on like much social media, but Asian Capitalists, of course, are on Facebook.
Yes.
And you guys have a Twitter, technically.
Check us out on BitChute. Because the latest video got taken down by YouTube, but it's still on BitChute. So do check us out on BitChute.
Right. So, but yeah, thanks for coming on, man. Yeah, and again, of course, next week, we're not sure if Brook's going to be back by Thursday for sure, but we're not sure if we're doing a show. So, yeah, check out our other shows, subscribe to us on iTunes, and of course, check out, like and comment on the video. So thank you for joining us. We will see you guys later in the week.